Welcome to the Medical Device Made Easy podcast. Here is Munir Lazouzi from easymedicaldevice.com. And today we'll talk about software as medical device in MDR and IVDR. And I have with me Cesare Magri, CEO of 4Better Devices. Cesare, welcome to the Medical Device Made Easy podcast.
Hi, Munir. Thank you.
So, Cesare, today we'll talk about software. You had a lot of issues. I mean, each time people are coming, they are thinking they have some mistake. If I can say, they are misunderstanding some concept about software as medical device. So we'll try to talk about that today. But just before, as it's been a long time, you haven't been on the podcast. So can you make a small introduction of yourself?
Yes, I'm Cesare. I'm the CEO of 4Better Devices. We are a CRO based in Germany. We help developing the clinical strategies, the intended purposes, and the clinical study plans for medical devices, in vitro diagnostics, software, medical devices. You can come to us anytime, and we'll be happy to help you.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I'm also contacting Cesare for some of my projects, so it's really a good source to go and to get some help. So, Cesare, today we'll talk about software as medical devices. This software needs also to do some clinical evaluation or performance evaluation. And you wanted to tell us more about some common mistakes that are coming and are starting to be seen when manufacturers are coming to discuss with you or to ask you for some support. So what is the main mistake that you are seeing on this field here?
Yeah, so it's a problem that affects not just software, but also in vitro diagnostic, we see, and there it's very systematically we get the same type of misconception on the way one should create the clinical evaluation, evaluate the clinical performance of these devices. And it is that, and we will see why, I'll just summarize it, that compared to the classical medical device, in vitro diagnostic and software medical device, they have an additional component. And often the manufacturer just stop developing this clinical strategy at this additional component and forget the patient. And this is essentially the main problem. It's not that what they do is wrong, but they forget some pieces.
Okay.
And we see it extremely regularly, especially with as I said, in vitro diagnostic and all the startups that come with artificial intelligence ideas. I mean, sometimes we can even predict what we tell them, look, I think you have planned this, and they are like, yes. And it's really like, we already know what they thought of, and then we try to make them realize what is the missing pieces, and it's extremely systematic what we see. And it's, the same thing is also with in vitro diagnostic.
So what is this missing piece, if I can say, the thing that they are not really getting or not understanding here? Okay,
before talking about that, let's think for a moment of the classical medical device, not the software medical device. So the classical device that it's applied somewhere on the patient. There you usually have three main entities, which are the device itself, the user, and the patient. Okay. And it's easy to think that when you are testing the device alone, you're doing verification. If you are testing the device with the user without the patient, you're doing usability tests. And if you are testing the whole chain, so device, user, and patient, and check the effect of the device on the patient, then you're doing a clinical investigation. Typically, you're testing the clinical performance of the device. Sometimes here there's a bit the complication that the patient can also be the user, which is sometimes a bit confusing because depending on what you're trying to understand, to try to test, you can either have the patient being the patient, so you are in the clinical investigation domain, or you're just in usability investigation. But this, it's relatively straightforward to think, okay, what do I have to do to test my device? I need to take all the three elements together.
Exactly.
Okay? That's easy.
So now, I mean, this is easy because I think we if I can say it's concrete. We are touching that, and we are seeing that. Here, when you talk about in vitro diagnostic and software, it's maybe more abstract for some of those elements.
And I think it's particularly abstract for software. So that's why I prefer to make examples with in vitro diagnostic, because it's a bit more concrete. And the fact is, in vitro diagnostic devices, you have 4 elements instead of 3. Okay. You have the device itself, the user, which again can also be the patient eventually, and the patient obviously. But before you have the patient, you have the sample that's taken from the patient. Okay, so here you can have more step of tests that you can do compared to the medical device, the classical one. So you can test just the medical device itself, verification, the medical device with the user, and that's usability. And at a certain point, you will start thinking, okay, now I test something on the sample, which is perfectly makes sense. That's the analytical performance. But many manufacturers, they think we stop here. So typically is, let's make an example with a copy test, for example. No? You would say, I would take samples from the swabs that were taken from thousands of patients. I will use the PCR test as a gold standard, and then I would compare my method, my new test, to this gold standard on this sample. And they think, oh, it's great because I'm not getting even in contact with the patient, so I don't even have to deal with them. I mean, there's no risk. It sounds very easy, and then I will compute my my specificity and sensitivity, and then I'm done. And they think, oh, that's it. And the problem is that that's not it. It can be it if the domain in which you are working it is super well established. Okay. So for example, for COVID tests, you might know that if you reach a given specificity and sensitivity compared to PCR, then you know what the effect for the patient is going to be in the end, okay, what the consequence will be. But many in vitro diagnostic domains, especially the new ones that are also now forced to go through IVDR, they are not so well established. And so even if they can determine the specificity and sensitivity of this test, they are not able to say what the clinical risks and the clinical performance for the patient, the benefits for the patient will be in the end. So stopping there, even if it's somehow approaching this clinical step because you're starting to use something concrete from the patient, it's not the clinical performance, it's the analytical performance. And there is a piece missing. We saw it, for example, I mean, you have in vitro diagnostic manufacturer, they come with big claims. They want to predict how a specific drug or is going to work on the patient based on some sample, okay? And they have a very innovative technique. And they say, okay, now I'm going to compare myself, the prediction of my device to what happened to the client in the future who was treated without using the information from my in vitro diagnostic. That's not enough because in that case you're not using your device within the in vitro diagnostic chain. Okay, so you're not using the device in the chain that is for taking the clinical decision concerning therapy or diagnostics. So you're not really testing the clinical performance of your device. You're testing some sort of correlation of what your device outputted and to what the happened to the patient. It's an interesting information. It's not that it's not interesting, but it's not the end of the story. It's not what the notified body will request you to have. Again, there can be some situation where this is enough. There can be some fields where you can essentially say from checking some sort of database or some preclinical information, you can make prediction on what will happen to the patient. But most often, especially with this kind of devices, that is not the case. And another typical misconception is that one compares their device to the decision or the whatever the doctor says in terms of that. So remember that a doctor is not a gold standard. A doctor can be standard of care. Okay, so there are some cases where you really have alternative in vitro diagnostic technique that you consider as gold standard. You can compare to them, but you cannot take the doctor as the gold standard and say because I took the same decision as the doctor.
Yeah, but then a human is a human, so it can make mistakes also. So it's not like you can say, yes, it's the truth, what they are saying, because and if you take 10 doctors, maybe the 10 have different minds or different advices to provide. So I think, yeah, it's not really the thing of truth.
We see this type of reasoning all the time, really all the time. So it's more the norm than the exception. And the same thing is with software. because if you think of the medical device software, that's why there is this MDCG 2021. Right? They essentially tell you that you have to evaluate clinically your software if it were an individual diagnostic. The reason for is that, again, there you have 4 parts. You have the device, you have the user, and you have the patient. But in between the device and the patient, you also have the data that you are collecting from the patient. And these data are just like a sample, as if it were urine or blood that you were collecting from the patient, that you're using to affect the therapy or diagnostic. And so you have the same exact.
For in vitro diagnostic, it can be like a specimen or sample that we are collecting.
Yes.
For a software as medical device, it can be like an image, like a MRI image or this kind of thing that we are collecting, and then we are testing that. So it's the same
image, but it can also be, just previous patient data from their records. Yeah. That's also a sort of specimen that you're using, and you are elaborating them and extracting a new information that you will present to the doctor to try to affect his her decision concerning the therapy and the diagnosis. So, and this is important because here as well, what we get these AI startups. They come to us and they think they thought it through, and they probably are in connection with some university or hospital, and they say, oh, now we're gonna get a huge gigantic database, concerning the outcome of collected with what is the gold standard in the field, and we are gonna check our artificial intelligence algorithm compares to that. And that's also very typical for AI, because they usually have training databases and then databases to which they compare themselves to. So it's a standard way of thinking of the field. And for them, that's the end of the story. And they get sometimes even upset when you make them realize, pay attention. Here, if you do that, it's a starting point. You can say that the situation looks good, but then you really have to see what's going to happen to the patient that has been diagnosed or for which the therapy was determined based on your device. What is going to happen to this patient compared to the standard of care? And that's the hard part, essentially. It's the clinical study that you have to build for determining this kind of information. Again, there are exceptions, but it's more like exceptions than the norm. So that's
so just maybe for also clarification with the regarding those software or those in vitro diagnostic things. So do you as we talked about medical devices, we talk about clinical investigation because we are involving patients here. We have first in human use. Here on this case, are we talking also about clinical investigation when we are doing that, or it's completely a different strategy here?
No, for the medical device software, it would be a clinical investigation. And for the in vitro diagnostic, it would be a performance investigation. But it's essentially the same concept. There is no really gigantic difference. They use this terminology to differentiate the two fields. They wanted to highlight the analytical performance thing. One thing, however, it's important, and we also try to stress when we talk to the startups. Sometimes also this first step, the one of collecting these databases or this sample that you don't collect explicitly for your device, but you recycle from somewhere. There are still small clinical investigation and small performance evaluation. So they are regulated. Okay, I have to say that at the moment the notified body are not stressing too much about this. So I think that right now, even if one goes with the database collected through university for which there was no clinical investigation plan, let's say so, they are going to still accept the data. But you have to think about the collection of the data from you are still a sponsor. Even sometimes one tries to avoid this word and they say, oh, we're collaborating with the university. They are collecting the data anyways. And the problem is, yes, they can do it, but then that's their data. You won't be able to use this data legally for your performance or clinical evaluation. So if you want to be able to use them and also in the future, you have to be upfront, and practically you have to treat it as a 14155 investigation.
Yeah.
The
so
difference
ethical
is,
committee, investigation brochure, all those things that should be initiated.
yes, so the difference are, for example, if suppose you want to collect now a specific sample from patient for using, so you will create a clinical investigation plan. If doctors are involved, they will get the ethics commission approval. They will get the oh, there's a word. So I only have in German the comment of the ethics commission concerning the study. But you will treat it just like any clinical investigation. You will have a report because you want to use all this information in your CEP and your CER. It's the same thing. So you really treat them as if it were a clinical trial. The difference is you won't have to go through the whole process with the competent authorities. You still, if you do it in Europe, you still have to mention to them that you're going to do this data collection. So even if it's very trivial, you still have to notify them, but you won't have to get their approval of the CI that concerning, say, it's just a notification, and you don't have to report adverse events and so on, because it's assuming that you're not doing anything strange on the patient that could affect their safety. But the procedure, the mental procedure should be like, it's a first very simple clinical investigation that I'm doing before eventually the bigger one.
So in terms of now that we, if I can say, described a bit the problem and what the errors that manufacturers are doing and what they should, how it's better to go for. So if now you had to start, if a company is coming to you before they are, if I can say, starting the development or starting even the clinical part, what would you recommend them to follow as steps? Step one, do this, step two, do that. So what would be kind of the steps to follow so that they are reaching the right outcome here for their clinical evaluation?
It's always the same for all type of performance evaluation or clinical evaluation. It's first you draft it on the purpose, okay? And then you dig really into a state-of-the-art analysis, but a very systematic one in which you really try to understand how the field works. What is really standard of care in the countries where you are going to sell this product, okay? So how does it really work? What is the terminology? How would you express things so that the users, the doctors, they can really understand immediately what you are talking about? And then you reformulate your intended purpose, but with that information, we'll also be able to practically define the entire clinical strategy. We'll be able to define the claims, what is to be considered enough, what are the standard adverse events that you should monitor. You will be able to say, look, I mean, my field is so well established that everyone knows that if I'm as good as a PCR test, then it's going to be fine for the patient. We don't have to discuss this. There are maybe guidelines and so on. It's fine. Or you might say, look, there's not so much information on that. I can show that there is some correlation between what I measure and what I want to predict, but I cannot really tell if my device is going to be safe for the patient or not. But if I have to measure that, how should I do it? What is the standard way of doing that for that specific medical field? And that's absolutely the number one step that gets ignored most of the time. And unfortunately, what we also see is that it's not enough sometimes to have like a doctor in the team. Many company thinks they okay, we have our doctor. They know. I mean, probably they're gonna tell you 70% of the correct information, but what is really needed is this systematic approach, because it could be that the 30% comes just from their personal experience. It's probably not wrong, but it's not really standard of care. It's the way they do things. And in the moment you try to put things together, you see that you are not able really to defend this type of position. So it's not just about talking with doctors, it's really to sit down and look very systematically to what is the standard of the field, the core baseline, the underpinnings of that specific medical field.
Great.
And that's the most important thing.
So how you at For Better Devices can help on that. So what exactly are you doing or helping the manufacturers to reach out those objectives there?
We do exactly this job. We make clarity essentially. So and this clarity sometimes it's also a bit painful. Let's say so. It's about looking at the standard of care. What makes sense to formulate as a claim? What does not make sense? Looking exactly at this detail and do it in a very systematic way. I mean, doing these systematic searches, it's not easy. I mean, there are certain reasoning that go beyond them. They are standard, but sometimes they're also practically not easy. So you end up with tons of documents that you have to sort and screen, and then document your sorting and document why you did a specific screening. And it can become really overwhelming unless you have a streamlined process for doing only that. So that's essentially the point. And that's what we do exactly. We have a team of doctors and with biologists and so on. And so we try to sit down and think, but sometimes the surprising thing, I think, is that sometimes there's this background knowledge at the clients, but if you ask them to formulate exactly what does your device do, you don't get a straightforward, clear reply. It's you get a sense of what they want to achieve, but it's something that it's very blurry formulated, and you start to notice it immediately when strange words pop up, like we support, but we help, but we don't really want to claim anything more, and so on. You notice it immediately, and so the point there is that there's no way with MDR, IVDR, you have to be very clear, and you have to be really to specify things clearly. Otherwise, the whole castle just crumbles down. It's so an error in the intended purpose, and then the whole structure of the CR won't hold together.
Yeah, no, I completely agree, and I think notified bodies will really challenge anything that is not clear, and will really stop, if I can say, the process of reviewing your device if there is any doubt on this kind of thing. So if it's clear on your mind, if it's clear on the mind of everybody, then it will be clear also for notified bodies, because they have to have some clarity.
We see that reviewers are becoming better and better, honestly. I would say that they are going away from the formalities and digging way more into the core of the problems. So they are much better at spotting the real problems, and not just, okay, why is it 2 years? So why did you choose this database and kind of things, but really to spotting why. So here your intended purpose is unclear, that you have a mistake there, or your risk management doesn't make sense. It's not linked to your clinical data. So they really spot it well. Sometimes I've noticed now there is more likely to get also expert directly from the field of the device, but in general, I think that the level has stepped up. It's much more scientific review than it used to be even just 1 year ago.
I think I agree also. Yeah, we had a lot now in interaction with the regulators, with the reviewers, and they have the right question. They ask the right question. It's not just a question that we ask, why are they asking that? No. Yeah. They spot really the point, and it's a good question. Why we should have addressed that also in our report. So, which is, I think, great. So, Cesare, how people can follow up with you? So, what is your website now?
So it's forbetterdevices.com. Probably we can write it also in the.
Yeah, I will put that on the show notes anyway. So.
If you need, it's almost ready. I think in the next 2 days it's gonna be there, so it can be accessed.
No problem.
And, you can contact us.
So if you need a CRO, so contact Cesare Magri at forbetterdevices.com, and he will be able to help you. I mean, as I said, I'm also working with Cesare, so if there is any work that he can do on clinical evaluation, on CRO, on clinical investigation, he's the guy that you have to contact, and I hope you'll get the same service as what I'm getting when I work with him. So I think it's a great one. So
thank you.
So Cesare, thank you again for all this information. I think you have. If we have some questions, so people can contact you directly on LinkedIn. I will put also your LinkedIn profile, if I can say, on the show notes. But yeah, anyway, I'm sure that there is a lot of people that will recognize themselves on there's software, there's in vitro diagnostic problems, because mainly, yeah, as you've said, they are more looking at some analytical point than looking at the whole picture with the patient, with the clinical aspect at the end for that. So I hope, yeah, this episode helped a lot of people to understand, and I hope this will correct some misunderstanding related to what is expected for the software. So thank you, Cesare, and I wish you a nice day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.